On WCNC Plus just after 10 a.m. on a Friday morning. I'm Jane Monroe. Thank you for sticking with us here as we bring you the latest streaming news as it comes and some of the important stories affecting our community. As we want to talk right now about Monroe, where the community there is grappling with a difficult decision. The city planning to relocate an entire historic cemetery to make way for new economic development. Our Nate Morabito looking into this story. And Nate, this is quite a shock for a lot of families involved, huh?
Yeah, I mean, this is the first time I've ever covered a story like this. Like, you know, in your reporting career, you might come across a situation where there's an old crime and they're going to exhume a body. I've never really heard how common it is to uproot an older, in this case, family cemetery and move them to a new cemetery, but that's the case. And I'll tell you, I started putting some of this on social media yesterday, and it's really kind of gone wild. About 19,000 people on TikTok alone have seen hundreds of comments. Everybody has an opinion, and I honestly can see both sides of this thing. And, you know, I think I'm curious mostly to hear what other people think too, because this has already been approved. But the city of Monroe wants to hear people's feedback, and so this is the perfect opportunity right now to tell people what's going on there.
All right, let's go and play this story. It aired last night on WCNC Charlotte.
Off limits to the public, this may just look like another piece of land in an industrial area the city of Monroe is marketing for economic development. But down a dirt road sits the final resting place.
So we are walking into the Billywood Cemetery
Of several families.
There are quite a bit of footstones that are still intact.
Assistant City Manager Jeff Wells says even though the city bought the land in 2018, current Monroe leaders didn't realize the cemetery existed until this past winter.
We weren't aware of it.
He told us the city only discovered the burial ground as crews evaluated the land for potential development. Wells says that's when the city launched a historical investigation and learned over almost 200 years
This whole area used to be just a field.
grazing cattle and new trees likely damaged many of the monuments in the abandoned cemetery. The discovery led them to clean up the overgrowth and move forward with relocating the graves, allowed by state law as long as, among other things, Monroe gave 30 days written notice to next of kin. The city identified 170 descendants and sent them letters. Only 15 responded. Just one expressed opposition, but several others didn't get any notice.
This is my fifth great-grandfather.
August Troll is one of those people.
The fact that they're already making a plan to relocate it and kind of take this away from us after we just got it back feels very upsetting.
Troll found out about Monroe's plan to relocate the Billywood Cemetery almost a month after city council members
All those in favor, please signify by raising your hand.
had already unanimously approved it, and just weeks before it's set to occur.
I haven't even really been given a lot of time to process those emotions.
Clearly you haven't reached out to everyone. Maybe you didn't know there were more people out there. Can you understand why some people will be disappointed they haven't heard from the city yet?
We certainly can understand that.
Wells says leaders want to hear from everyone and are even willing to bring them here to pay their respects.
The city is doing everything they can to be sensitive to the situation.
Wells says one of the ways the city is working to respect the dignity of those buried here is ensuring the way this cemetery is laid out is identical at the new location, here at the city-owned Suncrest Cemetery.
They'll be able to be relocated somewhere with perpetual care. I think that's the most important point.
This one is really interesting.
Troll can see some of the benefits, but struggles giving it a blessing,
I would rather it stay where it is.
since some relatives weren't included from the start.
I at least want us to have a conversation about it.
Nate Morabito, WCNC Charlotte.
All right, so Nate, talk us through how this story was discovered and what the city process then is about acquiring property.
Yeah, I mean, so I was basically tipped off that this was happening and was already in motion, and at this point, no one else has covered this from the news media. So I knew at the least the public should be made aware of this from a journalist side, because they did hold a public hearing, as is required. The city of Monroe did. Very few people have spoken publicly about this. There was a meeting earlier this month where someone spoke out against it. At the June meeting where this was approved, a woman who has ancestors buried there, shared kind of some concerns about both. It was emotional to know that the family's remains would be disturbed, but also understanding that the city is trying to work with them. They're going to allow a pastor to be there for the relocation and the reinterment. At the new cemetery, they're going to do their best to preserve the monuments and reuse them when possible. The ones that are broken are going to go in the ground in a box with the remains. As you heard me say, the cemetery is going to be laid out exactly the same. Understanding familial relationships, maybe a husband and wife were buried next to each other. There's kids at that cemetery, trying to keep the location. Other than that it's not going to be where it is now, at least the layout the same. And, you know, we started asking questions, and even you heard from August there. August has a great grandparent and then a fifth great grandparent there as well as some other relatives. And after we alerted the assistant city manager that August had not been made aware of this, their grandfather had not been made aware of this, their aunt had not been made aware of this, the city started working on communicating and did talk with August, and August feels a little bit better now, at least that there's been some kind of conversations, but doesn't really understand why it's moving so fast, as kind of we pointed out here. You know, it looks like these letters went out around April. There were some efforts in March, April here to kind of get the word out. There was a hearing in June. End of this month, they're going to start moving this. And there are, if you think about it, if there's at least 50 souls in that cemetery, and some date back to 1842, imagine the lineage here. How many people might be out
generations
there that don't know? And the one woman that spoke in June before the city council kind of said that, you know, my great aunts in Florida are concerned about this. You know, we're talking about really far down the line that it's probably difficult to reach everyone, but that's another reason why I wanted to get this story out there, because I feel like anybody who has a relative of any kind buried there has a right to voice their opinion on this matter. And only 15 people responded of the 170 that they mailed letters to.
That is wild. And so this can happen anywhere. It also
in North Carolina, there's a law that allows it. That's what was surprising to me too, that there is a law that allows for cases like this where a city can meet certain requirements and then move grave sites. And people, you know, on social media have just been kind of pointing out all these different locations, both in North Carolina and other parts of the country where this has happened. And I think that what's tricky here is that the city says we couldn't really keep it where it was. It's just not in a position where we can keep it there. And I also think it's unusual that the city bought this in 2018 and then new city management didn't find out about it until 2025.
Why the disconnect?
Yeah, and that's not really an answer that we've been able to get. They knew that the land the city owned, they did not know, they're telling us, that there was a cemetery there. They believe that past city management may have known there was a cemetery there. That information probably should be shared when there's a transition, because it's so sensitive. You know, and I totally get, there have been people who've gone out there already with the city management team, and more that will be going out to visit it. And this stirs up a lot of emotions for people. And some may say, well, these people have been gone forever. You know, what does it matter? Well, imagine if it was your family.
Right.
And this is a time when there probably weren't caskets, so there's just loose human remains in the ground. You don't want to miss anything, and of course they're going to bring experts in to make sure they don't miss anything with the technology. But while we were there, we also noticed some bones, by the way, and it turns out that the city's now telling us that they were not human bones, but one was in a depression in front of a grave. You know, I'm not an expert, and they kind of, to me, looked like they could have been human bones. There was another set near a tree that, to me, looked more like animal bones, but what do I know, first of all? And I kind of asked them, I said, what do you guys think here? What's going on? And they said, well, it could be human, but we think it's an animal carcass. And they've since confirmed that their anthropologist has determined that they were not human. But think about all the years that have passed, all the animals that have gone through there, the trees that have grown up. I mean, it's just not an ideal situation. And I should also point out that the families knew this cemetery existed. They didn't know where it was. So people will say, well, why weren't they visiting this cemetery all along? They all of a sudden care now. Well, they didn't know where the cemetery was to even visit. And now that they do, they just have this bittersweet feeling of, we're connected to this. We're just now finding out where it's located, and we have no time to try and fight it.
And so what happens next?
Well, this is really interesting because as it stands, this is supposed to be a 3-day relocation. By the end of this month, it's going to cost about $68,000, the city. I don't know what the responses are going to be like. That's the thing about doing these stories. I don't have an agenda here other than informing the public. I want them to know and weigh in, good or bad, especially if they have family there. We already know they've approved it, so short of the courts getting involved, I don't really see it getting delayed unless the city says, you know what, we're going to pump the brakes just a little bit. We followed all the rules. We put notice in the newspaper 4 weeks in a row. We notified everyone who we reasonable could find. But in an effort to be sensitive and open, we're just going to extend it just a little bit longer. I could see that happening. But he also makes a good point. These people are going to get perpetual care. Their graves will get perpetual care. At the new location, families will be able to visit easily. You saw the gate there. We had to be escorted onto the property. There are some that I think are really upset and may take it to the next level, but I really don't know at this point. I just know that a lot of people are just now finding out, and like we're 2 weeks away from this starting to move.
Oh my goodness. I mean, really, you can do so much to preserve the dignity of the burial and with the relocation and, like you said, giving it the care. But there's still that connection to the site and then learning of it and just the whole process of how did we get to here.
And these people were farmers. I mean, they were here before Monroe existed. So these are people that in some way are natives to this area. Some will call them founders to some degree. And it's just so challenging. You know, the historical investigation the city launched did not determine that it was not eligible to be a historic site.
Oh, okay.
Because there's certain requirements you need to make, and their investigation, which they contracted with an anthropology firm, determined that it's just not eligible. There's not enough elements there to make it that. But those gravestones are so ornate, they're handwritten. I mean, if you think about how old they are, it just amazes me that people back then were able to have the wherewithal to do that, but they did that for a reason, too. And I think that that's something that I can certainly sympathize and empathize with people in this situation because, man, their families were there for a reason, loved ones, or they hired someone to do this beautiful work on these headstones. And for whatever reason, it kind of got forgotten. The location did. And there's economic development. This is an industrial zoned area. I think that's a real trigger for people. The fact that that's like the end game here is the economic development.
Right. That doesn't make things any easier.
Right. And that's kind of what really drew my interest. I knew they were relocating, and then I found out why, and I thought, the public really needs to be able to kind of weigh in, and at least for transparency reasons, see it. I don't believe they were hiding anything. There's no evidence that they've been trying to hide this. They went to the public hearing. They made some public notices. You can find the documents online that are related to this if you know what to look for. I just think the question is, are they moving too fast? Is, from the family's perspective, a fair question.
Right. And like you said, you got a lot of reaction already on social media and then the community at large in Monroe, right? What are they saying?
Yeah, I mean, it seems to be a polarizing issue, honestly. I mean, especially I'm communicating with two different people in particular that are really on both ends of this, and maybe some might see an extreme way. Generally, the answers are usually in the middle, and I think that I'll be curious over the next day or two what kind of feedback they get. I know that the city was actually welcoming for us to come out there because at least what they're telling me is they want to find other people and hear from other people.
Oh, okay.
They want to make the phone call. They want to allow them to come out and visit and pay their respects if they'd like to. It's a delicate situation, and I think from the institution of the city, people are concerned that maybe this process could have been a little bit slower. Maybe they could have done some more things to help market the situation. But at this point, we're so far removed from the first death there that people could be spread out all over the country, maybe even all over the world, too. It's probably hard to reach out to those people, but do they deserve
to know?
Absolutely. Yes.
Absolutely, they do.
All right,
Well,
yes.
maybe your story, because you said it's blowing up online, maybe that will be the thing that helps travel and far out, and people can remember, like, maybe, my lineage is there, and look into it.
Yeah, that's what I want people to do. I want people to see this is Billywood Cemetery. That's what it's called.
Okay.
I want them to know about it, and I want them to, if they have family there, reach out and share, good or bad, their thoughts on it. I just think that that's the way the process needs to work. And thank goodness someone let me know about this, because otherwise the public at large would have no clue right now.
Right. So 170 descendants, only 15 have responded so
And there
far.
are more than 170 because we've been able to find a few others.
Okay. All right. Very good. Nate Morabito, more to come, I'm sure, from the city of Monroe and the relocation of a historic, a very long-standing cemetery, making room for economic development. Thanks for bringing us that story, as always.
All right, Jane, thanks.